I always thought my wife was my closest ally, the one person I could count on without question. But one night shattered that certainty. Imagine this, me, dressed to the nines in my dark blue tux, the first time I'd worn it in 3 years, standing at a big town fundraiser, feeling completely out of place. My wife, on the other hand, looked radiant, almost too radiant, in a maroon dress that had every head in the room turning her way. She was 35 and in her prime, drawing in all the attention. I should have been proud, and part of me was, but there was also this discomfort gnawing at me. As I watched her navigate the room, mingling with ease, I noticed she was deeply engaged in conversation with Senator Tom Archer, a man who walked and talked with the kind of confidence that left a strong impression. He had that Burt Reynolds charm, and she was hooked, her attention focused solely on him. It felt like I was invisible. I tried to make my presence known by placing our drinks right between them, but Archer barely acknowledged me before brushing past, adding fuel to my growing irritation. When I muttered that he was a fool, she immediately defended him, turning on me instead. She said I was the one being rude, completely ignoring our marriage boundaries. My heart sank as she rolled her eyes, a gesture she knew would hit me. In that moment, I realized something I never expected: I wasn't the partner standing by her side. I was just the man being left behind. Dinner passed uneventfully, and when the band started up, I asked her to dance, but she refused. That hit harder than I expected. I chatted with a few others, but I kept my eye on Archer, who had slipped out onto the veranda. I followed, and there he was, arm around my wife, leaning in close, talking. I started toward them, but someone grabbed my arm, warning me not to mess with the senator. "That's my wife," I snapped, but I was ushered back inside. Furious, I demanded they bring her back, and when she finally returned, she played innocent, which only added fuel to my frustration. I took her hand, and we left in silence. The drive home started off quietly, but then she let loose, accusing me of humiliating her. I said I was just protecting our marriage's boundaries, but she fired back, calling me possessive. Her words stung, but I knew she understood exactly what I meant. Still, things started to feel tense at home. Even dinner with the kids felt strained. A few days later, she sat me down, saying we needed to talk, a phrase that never led to anything good. She told me she planned to attend another fundraiser with Archer, calling it a professional date. I objected, saying it wasn't appropriate, but she brushed it off, claiming I was blowing it out of proportion. When I brought up how she'd judged her friend Lisa for similar behavior, her response only deepened my suspicions. "That's different," she said, insisting that a date with a senator wasn't the same as a casual date. But I didn't buy it. "You can't just go out with another man, Claire. We're married," I reminded her firmly. "You don't own me, John," she fired back. "Just because we're married doesn't mean I can't do what I want." Her words stung, but I was determined to hold our family together. "You're the mother of our kids. We can't tear this family apart over something like this," I pleaded. She rolled her eyes, saying I was being ridiculous. Then, on the night of the so-called non-date, she walked out in a stunning white gown. Even our kids stared, asking why she was so dressed up. She struggled to come up with an answer, so I cut to the chase, telling them the truth. When the doorbell rang, I gave her one last chance. "It's him or us," I told her. She chose him, leaving with a quick, "Be good for daddy," to the kids as she stepped into a black limo. I stood there for a moment, stunned. But I pulled myself together for the kids' sake. Drowning my sorrows in a bottle wasn't an option, so I called both sets of grandparents and let the kids chat with them. When I told her parents where she'd gone, they were speechless. "How could you let her go?" they asked, but I told them I'd tried everything. The kids' chatter with their grandparents brought some brief distraction, but when I called my own parents, my mom, blunt as ever, gave her advice without hesitation: get a lawyer. After the calls, I ordered pizza, put on a Disney movie for the kids, and flipped through ESPN, trying to distract myself, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I made pancakes and bacon for the kids, telling them their mom would be back soon, even if I wasn't sure about it myself. Around 1 p.m., that same black limo rolled into the driveway. The kids and even a few neighbors noticed, but this time, my kids didn't run out to greet her. They stayed put, watching as she climbed out looking rumpled and distant. She wore the same maroon dress from the night before, wrinkled, with smudged makeup and a tired look in her eyes. I stayed where I was on the couch, not bothering to get up. "Hey," she said, like it was just another day. "Looks like you and the kids managed without me," she added, noticing the calm. My reply was short, "Yeah, we did." She muttered something about needing a shower and headed upstairs. I raised my hands in mock surrender, realizing our marriage was finished. Now, I had to focus on the kids. I wasn't going to be just a weekend dad, but I couldn't shake the question, could I make it until they graduated? Around 7 p.m., Rachel finally reappeared, freshly showered but emotionally distant. I'd already made dinner, and I told her there were leftovers in the fridge. She gave a faint smile, but the tension was so thick that even the kids sensed it and stayed out of the way. When we were alone, she accused me of poisoning the kids against her, saying I'd turned them against her. "Really?" I shot back. "They're reacting to what you did, Rachel. You think they don't notice?" She shook her head. "I didn't break up this family, John. That's on you. If you can get over your ego, we can move forward. If not, we'll go our separate ways, and you can be a part-time dad." I couldn't believe the venom in her voice. "It's 1 p.m, I snapped. "Last night wasn't enough? You needed a midday fling, too?" She hesitated, avoiding my eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "but I don't regret it. I needed it for myself." Her lack of remorse hit me hard. "That's your apology?" I asked, feeling the blow. "You're sorry for hurting me, but nothing else? You think this was just about you?" "It was amazing for me, yes," she admitted, without a hint of regret. "But we can still move forward if you try." I shook my head. "No, it's too late for that," I replied. That night, I locked her out of our bedroom, and for the first time in days, I slept soundly, drained from it all. The next morning, I stuck to our Sunday tradition, making Belgian waffles for the kids. As we sat down, our daughter, Sophie, looked at me, concerned. "Mom looks really tired," she said. Trying to make light of things, I joked, "Maybe you should go out on Fridays more often, like Mom." But Hannah, already on edge, burst into tears and rushed to the bedroom. The kids looked confused. "Did I say something wrong?" Sophie asked. "No, sweetheart," I reassured her. "Mommy's just tired. She probably missed the waffles." Later, as I watched the Cubs game, Hannah stormed back in, furious, accusing me of making her look bad in front of her parents. "Hannah, calm down," I said, not even looking up from the game. "I can't understand you when you're yelling." She was crying, angry that I'd told her parents what happened. Just then, Sophie wandered in. "Mom, what's a Kardashian?" she asked innocently. Hannah quickly sent her out of the room, then turned back to me. "What exactly did you say to them?" I shrugged. "I told them the truth. They deserve to know what's been going on." Her face twisted in frustration. "It's not like that," she tried to explain, but I cut her off. "You said it was an amazing experience, right?" She glared at me, speechless. I gestured for her to move so I could see the TV. For the next 2 weeks, I slept in the guest room. The kids noticed, but I told them I had a cold and didn't want to pass it to their mom. Sophie, sharp as ever, seemed to pick up on more than I wanted, but thankfully, she didn't say anything. Then, one night after Hannah had gone to bed, I found myself slipping back into our shared bed. I wasn't even sure why, maybe it was habit, maybe exhaustion. When the alarm went off the next morning, she curled up close, whispering, this feels good," as she reached for my hand. I pulled it away. "We're not doing this until you get tested," I said softly but firmly. "You might trust him, but I don't." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of real shame. She nodded, and that's when it hit me, they hadn't used protection. The weight of it all sank even deeper. This wasn't a simple mistake, this was a whole mess that wouldn't just go away. I'd thought I could hold on for the kids, at least until they finished high school. That would mean another 14 years of pretending things could go back to normal. But now, I couldn't imagine it. My feelings for her had faded, and watching her walk away from the bed didn't hurt anymore. Instead of pain, I felt a cold detachment. Who was she now? The woman I'd married would never have crossed these lines. We'd met back in college, started dating a few months later, and got married 2 years after that. Hannah worked as an actuary, always precise and practical, balancing my more easygoing nature. I'd pictured us growing old together, but then Senator Ben Archer came along and disrupted everything. 10 days after our last conversation, Hannah handed me an envelope as soon as I walked through the door. Inside was her clean bill of health, just like I'd asked for. It was what I'd wanted, but holding that paper didn't fix anything. Our marriage was still broken, and no test result could change that. "Hope you're satisfied," she muttered coldly. You have no idea how humiliating that was. I may never be able to look Dr. Patel in the eye again. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Not my fault, honey. Stay faithful, and you won't need to feel embarrassed. She hissed under her breath but didn't reply. As she turned to leave, I pressed, "How often has the senator been reaching out to you?" She started to answer, but I cut her off with a wave of my hand. With a grimace, she handed me her phone. I scrolled through, finding texts and calls from him but nothing suggesting they'd met again. "Damn it," I muttered. "We're on thin ice." "Agreed," she said seriously, taking her phone back and heading into the kitchen. That night, she tried to show affection in bed, and instinct took over. I didn't feel anything for her beyond a physical impulse. I knew she was trying to win me back, but my mind was somewhere else. Hannah's sudden reappearance at home had stirred up gossip around the neighborhood. The sympathetic glances from men and the knowing smirks from women made it clear rumors were spreading. One evening, our daughter, Lucy, came to me with questions about something she overheard from a neighbor. I kept calm, explaining her mom's mistake and reassuring her as I hugged her tightly, keeping my emotions hidden. I knew the weight of that moment would haunt me. Our household settled into a new version of normal, but it wasn't the same as before. It couldn't be. Even if Hannah wouldn't admit it, things had permanently shifted. I knew I'd never fully trust her again. Forgiving her wasn't an option. Love, as Tina Turner once sang, didn't have much to do with this anymore. 6 months later, Hannah finally brought it up. One night, after she'd initiated intimacy and I turned away to sleep, as had become our habit, she began to cry. "Adam? Can we talk?" she asked softly. "Sure," I sighed, turning to face her. She hesitated before saying, "Do you realize how long it's been since we were truly close?" "Since that night, everything's changed." "I noticed," I replied. "You want to talk about closeness? Let's talk about what you did. You cheated on me with him. Just admit it." She winced. "You make it sound cheap and disgusting," she protested. "We made love that night, and yes, it was amazing. He was gentle and kind, like you used to be. That's not why we're distant now. Don't you get it?" I snapped. "You gave him something that was supposed to be ours alone. And you enjoyed it." She tried to explain. "Come on, Dan. It was one night. Just 2 days out of a lifetime of marriage. We can move past it if you're willing to try." "Thanks for the math lesson," I shot back, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "But I never saw our marriage as some numbers game. How would you feel if I spent the night with Sarah Lee Parker? Sarah Lee was the divorced blonde down the street. Most men noticed her, and so did their wives. Her eyes went wide. Are you saying you want Sarah Lee? Hannah asked, clearly shaken. Listen to yourself, I replied. I never said that. But imagine how you'd feel if I had. She turned red with a mixture of anger and realization, but I didn't stop there. Do you have any idea what your affair has done to Lucy? The girls in the neighborhood are bullying her, and their moms are talking. It's ugly. Hannah's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. She never told me, she whispered, sounding genuinely regretful. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Sorry doesn't cut it, I said coldly. You call that night unforgettable? Well, it was, but not for the reasons you think. It was a betrayal. With that, I turned over and went to sleep, not sure what her next move would be. To her credit, Hannah tried to make things right in the months that followed. She suddenly became the mother I'd always been for the kids, driving them to activities, supporting them in ways she hadn't before. Maybe she finally realized that prioritizing her family was the only way to hold it together. But for me, it felt too late. The kids seemed to enjoy her extra attention, especially Lucy, who'd always been wise beyond her 8 years. One day, she came to me and said, Mom's really trying, Daddy. I hope she gets a real apology for whatever she did wrong. I forced a smile, appreciating how much she understood without needing too many details. On the surface, life in the Harper household looked normal. I put on a good front, and Hannah worked hard too, not just to win me back but to save face with the neighbors. We'd become two strangers sharing a house, going through the motions and sharing responsibilities. She clung to the hope that I'd eventually soften and forgive her. Deep down, I still felt something for her. You don't just erase 9 years together. But she made it hard to let go of the resentment. Even with her efforts around the house, she kept up contact with Senator Archer. I'd checked her calls and messages after their affair to make sure she wasn't meeting him again. She kept her conversations clean of anything suspicious, but I couldn't shake the feeling she wasn't being entirely upfront. Despite her attempts to show she cared, I couldn't let go of what she'd done. I couldn't ignore the damage it caused to our family, to the kids, and to me. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded of her betrayal, and no matter how hard she tried, I knew things could never go back to the way they were. She didn't realize how easy it was to clone a phone and track all her communications. The senator seemed to keep in touch regularly, though she was keeping him at a distance, at least for now. About a month ago, he texted, *, can we schedule another date soon? I'll be in town, *, she replied, my hubby's still upset from last time, I can't risk it, she'd replied. Needless to say, I was anything but impressed. A month later, our 10th anniversary rolled around, and we took the kids on a family trip to Chuck E. Cheese to celebrate. The kids had a blast, but Hannah looked far from thrilled. Once they went off to play, she pulled me aside to voice her disappointment. We've always done something special for our anniversary, just the two of us. You're still holding on to a grudge. When did you become so petty and small? I gave her a cold look. The answer to that is the same as for all your questions about that night. You did this, Hannah. To us, to our family, and to yourself. Can't you just move past this, she pleaded. How often do you still talk to him? I asked bluntly. She let out a smirk, pulling her phone from her pocket and handing it over. I tossed it in the air and caught it again, unimpressed. You're smart, Hannah. I'll bet there's nothing incriminating here now. But what I don't understand is why you never once told him no. Why didn't you reject him? Her face flushed as she looked away. Exactly, I muttered, frustrated. Through all this, my job and my kids were my anchors. My colleagues kept mentioning how tired I looked, and I was sure I was starting to develop an ulcer. I was drinking more than I should, and sleep barely came. Nights were spent lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it had all gone wrong. She kept saying she still loved me, claiming her affair wasn't about our marriage. She showed no guilt over the affair itself, only regret about how much it hurt me. I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Surprisingly, my mother-in-law became a source of comfort. She'd called more than once to check on me, expressing her regret over Hannah's actions. "I'm so sorry, Adam. We didn't raise her to be this selfish. I really hope you can find a way to move past it," she said. "I see all you're doing for the kids." That meant something, at least. A few weeks later, we had our usual neighborhood summer picnic. 2 grills were running, and we had the usual spread: hot dogs, burgers, fruit, drinks, and desserts. It was sunny, around 80 degrees, a perfect day for one of those gatherings that lasted for hours. As I made my way through the house to grab more beer, I overheard voices coming from my office. That room was typically off-limits to guests, so I decided to check it out. Most of the party was outside, but occasionally, people would duck in for some AC or to chat. But this time, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. "Yeah, when Adam takes charge, I can't help but think of him," Hannah was saying. "He's assertive, driven, and focused. Sometimes I just can't shake the memory of that night with the senator. I'll cherish it forever." I froze. How many people knew I was being humiliated? Laughter floated from the room. There were 3 of them in there, all reveling in my embarrassment. I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up, emptying everything I'd eaten that day. After cleaning up, I grabbed a couple of beers for the guys at the grill and forced myself to act normal. "You all right, Adam? You seem a bit off," David Ramsey asked casually. "Yeah, I'm good," I lied, choosing to stay quiet for the rest of the day. When Hannah and her friends came back to the group, I felt their eyes on me, like they were all in on some private joke. It seemed like every woman there was sneering at me. Later that night, after putting the kids to bed and tidying up, I joined Hannah outside. She was lounging with a wine cooler, looking completely at ease. I sat down beside her. "Did anyone at the picnic not know about your affair?" I asked, keeping my tone sincere. She looked momentarily surprised. I kept my face neutral. "I might have mentioned it to a couple of girlfriends," she chuckled. "It was quite the experience. He's a charming senator, after all." I couldn't help but share. Her audacity stunned me. "So, first, you cheat on me. Then, you turn me into a joke for your friends. Every husband there knows, and now I'm branded as the fool." "I'm not unfaithful," she snapped back. "I won't wear that label. It was just one mistake. It's not like I slept with a stranger in some seedy motel." Her eyes flashed as she stood, her voice rising. "I'm done with this, Adam. You've dragged this out for over a year. Yes, your wife had an affair with another man. A handsome, successful man. It's time to move on. I'm not going to be held hostage by your insecurities. If you can't get past it, that's on you. Either file for divorce or face reality. I'm done pretending we're the perfect couple. Make a decision, now." Her words stunned me into silence. She walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts, barely able to process everything she'd just said. I'm naturally a reserved guy, slow to react, which some, including Hannah, mistake for weakness. I don't panic or make impulsive choices. I hated the thought of not seeing my kids every day, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending things were fine. I had prepared for the worst, with a lawyer on standby. So, I made my decision. First thing Monday morning, Hannah was served divorce papers at her workplace. As expected, she didn't take it well. Within 5 minutes, my phone buzzed non-stop with her calls, but I ignored them, bracing myself for the storm I knew awaited me at home. When I walked in from the garage, she erupted. "You fool. Your fragile ego couldn't handle it, so you had to humiliate me at work, she shouted. I kept my composure. Just like you humiliated us in front of our friends and neighbors, I replied calmly. You practically dared me to file, so I did. She glared at me but held her tongue. I set down my things and went to talk to the kids, reassuring them that even though I wouldn't be there every day, I loved them more than anything. Sophie, being older, understood. She had friends with divorced parents. Jack, though, was too young to grasp it all, looking at me with confusion. I knew Sophie would help him adjust. Living in a no-fault state, the divorce should have been straightforward. She'd get primary custody, the house, child support, and alimony. But instead of accepting it, Hannah fought it. For reasons known only to her, her lawyer dragged things out, arranging unnecessary meetings and even suggesting counseling. I confronted her in one of those counseling sessions. What's the point, Hannah? You've created all this chaos, and now you want to fix it. You even told your friends he was the best you'd ever had. Why would I stay married if all I get is more pain? But I love you, Dan, she pleaded. You're stuck on one mistake. Yes, he was great, but it was a one-time thing. Please, just forgive me. I can't, Hannah, I said flatly. You broke our vows and acted like they meant nothing. I can't ignore that. I hadn't intended to go as far as I did, but everyone has a breaking point. After her affair, I'd set up a backup plan. I'd connected with a powerful lawyer in the city and reached out to the chairman of the opposing political party. They were hungry for any dirt on Senator Archer, who had White House ambitions. I didn't want money, I just wanted him destroyed. Each month, my lawyer updated me on the chairman's growing eagerness for evidence that could bring Archer down. Finally, the time came. I met with the chairman and my lawyer at the firm's office. After introductions, I pulled out a sealed plastic bag from my briefcase and set it on the table. The chairman's eyes widened. Dear God, is that what I think it is? If you think it's the evidence that'll end Archer's career, then yes, I replied. They stared at the bag like it was pure gold, yet no one dared to touch it. I explained, that night, she came home and went straight to the shower. She handles the laundry, so she never expected me to go through it. I waited until the water was running, then went through the hamper. I found her underwear at the bottom. DNA testing isn't news to anyone these days. Test these, and I'm sure you'll find 2 different profiles. I also brought her toothbrush for comparison. I assume you'll get Archer's sample for a match, unless you already have it. The chairman's face turned red, and he glanced away, understanding the gravity of it all. His expression silently asked, why? Because she was arrogant enough to think she'd never face consequences, I replied. She betrayed me and assumed I'd just forgive her. Now she flaunts it. To hell with her and that senator she's with. A week after that meeting, Archer must have found out. I'm not sure exactly what went down, but I overheard him yelling at Hannah on the phone. How could your idiot husband get evidence of our weekend together, he fumed. I'd cloned her phone again, and when she called me later, I could hear the tension in her voice. What did you do? She asked, nervous. I hesitated, weighing my words. After months of her lies and betrayal, I finally came clean. I've been watching, Hannah, all along. She understood exactly what I meant, but I wasn't in the mood for any more of her games. I thought I wanted revenge, but maybe all I wanted was peace. As I ordered a pepperoni pizza and garlic bread, she snapped at me. Why do you care what I eat? How do you even know what I eat? She hated my calmness, always mistaking it for weakness. What Hannah hadn't realized was that I wasn't as feeble as she assumed. I'm not sure how you managed it, she continued, but somehow, you got back at Senator Archer. He's furious and even threatened me, though he won't say why. Thanks for that, by the way. Our parents are furious, Sophia won't speak to me, and you still don't understand that what Henry and I did had nothing to do with you. Funny, I was just about to bring that up, I replied. Senator Archer, once confident in his re-election, had mysteriously dropped out of the Senate race 8 months before the election, claiming mental fatigue. That news alone was satisfying. But with everything going on, dating was the last thing on my mind, until my daughter, Sophia, casually asked, "Dad, when are you going to start dating again?" I stared, floored. "What?" She grinned. "Emma's mom wants to go out with you." I must have looked shocked because she went on. "She didn't tell me directly. I overheard her talking to Annie's mom. I'd be okay with it, Dad. I don't want you to be alone. Just, please, not Olivia's mom. None of us like her. Kids really do pick up on everything, don't they?" Emma's mom, Jessica, had been divorced for about 5 years. She was lively, blonde, and still had the spark of her cheerleading days. I'd never considered her as an option, honestly. I hadn't been thinking about anyone other than my kids. When you're married, the idea of other women doesn't even cross your mind, or at least it hadn't for me. Was I naive? Sophia gave me a knowing smile. "It's okay, Dad. I'm almost 9. I get divorce and all that. Jack and I will be fine. You just need to take care of yourself." It felt strange, like I'd stumbled back into the dating world without even realizing it. Jessica ended up being my first date post-divorce, and while it was nice, it felt a bit awkward, almost like I was fulfilling an obligation. I explained that I wasn't emotionally ready for anything serious, and she understood. She even gave me some advice, saying, "You don't have to explain yourself to everyone you go out with. You're a good dad with a solid career." She blushed a little, adding, "Trust me, other divorced moms will notice." Over time, I went out with a few women, all divorced moms, and it felt good to be seen as something other than just the guy going through a divorce. It allowed me to think less about Hannah, or at least not as often. As lonely as I felt some days, I never once considered reconciling with her. The betrayal ran too deep. Hannah tried to downplay her affair as a one-time mistake, but I couldn't see it that way. To me, it was selfish, careless, and showed a complete lack of respect for our family. "You put an affair with the senator above your own family," I told her one evening. She opened her mouth to respond but then fell silent, unable to justify her actions, especially now that the senator had cut her off. One Saturday, over dinner, my ex-mother-in-law mentioned that Archer had told Hannah never to contact him again. He blamed her for his forced withdrawal from politics, suspecting I'd played a role in his downfall and feeling she hadn't done enough to shield him. I simply raised an eyebrow and kept eating. There was no need to comment. A few months later, some coworkers suggested we check out a new upscale bar that had just opened. Before my divorce, I'd have skipped the Thursday night outings. But now, with single life stretching out ahead of me, I found myself joining in more often. That evening, 4 of us snagged a table, ordered a round of drinks, and soaked up the bar's atmosphere. It was then I noticed 2 women walk in. The first one, probably in her early 40s, dressed as if she was clinging to her 30s. With short dark hair and green eyes, she had a confidence about her, wearing a silky blue blouse and a short skirt that highlighted her toned legs. Her friend, a little older, looked refined, almost out of place in the casual bar setting. Her shoulder-length silver blonde hair and dark eyes exuded elegance, and she wore a high-end sweater and skirt, hinting at a lifestyle of wealth. The dark-haired woman was quick to engage with the men around her, dancing with a few, clearly there to enjoy herself without holding back. The blonde was different. She danced sparingly, moving with a composed grace that contrasted with her friend's livelier style. Despite their differences, both attracted attention, and I couldn't help but wonder what it'd be like to dance with one of them. Watching the dark-haired woman on the floor, laughing and carefree, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a while, like I could leave the past behind and start fresh. An hour later, I'd resolved to ask the blonde for a dance. But just as I approached their table, the brunette took my hand and pulled me onto the floor. I forgot all about her friend, swept up in the moment with her. We danced through a few upbeat tracks, and when the music slowed, she kissed me without hesitation, a bold, passionate kiss. I was hooked. We left the bar together, ending up at my place. The night was electric, and as we talked, she opened up to me, sharing that she and her friend were celebrating her recent divorce. Her name was Amber, and she was an incredible lover. We ended up dating for about a month, but she hesitated to commit so soon after her own split, and I respected that. We parted on good terms, although I couldn't shake my curiosity about her friend. A few weeks later, with the kids at their mom's, I found myself alone at another upscale bar, unwinding with a drink. I was halfway through when she walked in, a woman with a commanding presence. She had that same elegance as Amber's friend, though this one had long, rich brown hair cascading over her shoulders. She glided across the room in high heels and settled into the seat next to me, radiating confidence. Before I could think of something smooth to say, she turned to me and asked what I was drinking. I grinned and told her my order, taking in her poise. "Excellent choice," she purred. "A man with good taste." Her name was Samantha Harris, and she ran her own boutique marketing company. We spent the evening talking about her career, and I was captivated by her intelligence and charm. Later, we went back to her apartment, where she confessed that she preferred her own bed. That night, she shared more with me than Hannah ever had in our 9 years of marriage. Samantha was dedicated to her work, didn't want kids, and preferred casual relationships. We ended up in a friends with benefits arrangement that lasted a year. Once a month, we'd meet up, and it was good while it lasted, until she fell for a younger guy. We ended things amicably, and I moved on. During this time, I stayed on good terms with my ex-mother-in-law, who often called to check in and sometimes even offered advice. Then one day, she surprised me with a request. "Adam, could you do me a favor? My assistant Claire hasn't dated anyone since her divorce, and I think she could use a decent guy." "Sure," I replied cautiously, "but promise me she's not boring." Mom laughed. "I think you'll be pleasantly surprised." She was right. Claire was delightful. She had a natural warmth and charm that wasn't over the top. She had this cute habit of wrinkling her nose and squinting her green eyes whenever something amused her. And most importantly, she was just fun to be around. At the company Christmas party, I stuck close to Claire, giving her my full attention. She was a bit reserved, often letting others take the lead in conversation, but I could tell she appreciated my company. We sat with my in-laws, who were as gracious as ever, though her dad took a little time to warm up. As the night went on, I impressed everyone with my dancing, a skill I'd picked up to please Hannah, who loved to dance. Claire turned out to be a great dancer, especially with the faster songs. When the music slowed, it felt as if we'd been dancing together for years. As I walked her to her car at the end of the night, she kissed me softly and handed me her number. A few days later, I called, and we went out for a proper date at a nice Italian restaurant, followed by an art exhibit. This time, Claire dressed more boldly than she had at the party, and I found myself even more taken with her. We had a fantastic time, and after a few more dates, I felt it was time for her to meet Sophie and for me to meet her daughter. We spent a beautiful day together playing mini-golf and enjoying a picnic at the park. It was simple but perfect, a new chapter opening in my life. Overall, things were going well. Claire and I met several times a week, and when I had my kids, we'd plan family activities with all 5 of us. Sophie and her daughter Chloe hit it off and formed a close bond. Jack, however, wasn't thrilled about having girls around, still clinging to that age-old belief that girls had cooties. Everything seemed to be falling into place until, one afternoon a few weeks into the new school year, I got a call from Hannah. "I'm not sure what your girlfriend's been teaching our kids, but your son was in the principal's office today for fighting. His face is a mess, and he's been suspended for 3 days. All he'll say is it started with some girl named Chloe, and he keeps calling her his sister," Hannah fumed over the phone. I stayed calm. "First, don't insult my girlfriend. Second, I'll come by after dinner and take Jack out for ice cream. Let's hold off on jumping to conclusions until we know what actually happened." She sighed, then hung up. After dinner, I picked up Jack and drove to a small family-owned ice cream parlor. When he climbed into the car, I gave him a once-over. There was a cut on his lip and a scratch across his cheek. He grinned. "You should see the other guy, Dad." "What's the truth, Jackson Lewis?" I used his full name so he'd know I meant business. He winced. "A kid was bullying Chloe, Dad. I told him to leave her alone, but he threw the first punch, so I hit him back. I think I broke his nose. It made a loud crack, and there was blood everywhere," he said, trying to keep a straight face. The boy had been 2 years older than Jack. "Will the principal tell me the same story?" I asked. "Absolutely, Dad. I wouldn't have hit him if he hadn't thrown the first punch. You always told me to protect Sophie, so I figured that meant Chloe too." "She's really small, Dad," he explained. Jack had a point. Chloe had inherited her mom's petite frame and was smaller than most kids her age. It touched me to see Jack viewing her as part of the family now. "I'm proud of you for standing up for her," I told him, "but let's keep this between us. I'll talk to the principal and see what we can work out. You might also want to let your mom know about Chloe. She doesn't know everything about my life, and that's fine by me, but you and Sophie should tell her." Jack nodded, taking it all in. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Dad, when are you going to marry Claire? She's amazing, you know." He wasn't wrong. It was time to make a commitment. The next day, I called the principal. The school had a strict zero-tolerance policy for fighting, even in cases of self-defense. However, they also didn't tolerate bullying, and after interviewing witnesses, the bully was given a 6-day suspension. Though I didn't agree with Jack's suspension, I advised him to take it in stride. Things got complicated when Hannah found out that Claire was my ex-mother-in-law's assistant and that she'd arranged for us to meet. "What on earth, Mom? Aren't you supposed to be on my side?" she yelled at her mother. "There are no sides," her mother replied coolly. "You ruined things with Adam. Why should a good man go to waste? Claire deserves someone like him." Hannah wasn't happy, but she had no one to blame but herself. My kids genuinely enjoyed being around Claire, especially Sophie. She'd watch Claire and me together and once said, "I don't know if you two are adorable or nauseating, but I like being around to watch it." A few months later, Claire and I had a small wedding with just our 3 kids, my parents, and my ex-in-laws. The court clerk officiating the ceremony looked a little surprised when he saw my ex-mother-in-law standing as Claire's maid of honor. "That's quite a story," I chuckled when she asked me about it. What none of us expected, though, was a federal inquiry that popped up a few weeks later. 2 federal marshals came to my office one Monday morning, asking about an incident involving Senator Archer. He'd apparently gotten into a physical altercation and been injured in the restroom of an upscale Houston restaurant, and my name, along with those of other husbands affected by his affairs, had come up as potential suspects. "I'm not sorry to hear about Archer's troubles," I told the marshals bluntly. "The man slept with my wife 4 years ago. If I'd wanted to do something, don't you think I would have acted sooner?" The marshals weren't amused, but the questioning went on. A week later, a reporter from the Associated Press appeared, asking for details. Somehow, he'd gotten a confidential list of 26 women Senator Archer had allegedly had affairs with while in office, and Hannah's name was on it. It seemed more people had known about her affair than I'd realized. Over the years, Hannah must have told others about it. She'd taken pride in it, I guess, but I wondered how proud she felt now that Archer's misconduct was public, with her name on the list of lovers. "Why did you tell him?" she nearly shouted over the phone. "I didn't," I replied calmly. "He told me your name was on Archer's list. I just confirmed it." I wasn't going to lie to save you from embarrassment. I'm not promiscuous. She screamed, but I ended the call. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. She'd made her choices, but I'd also have to deal with the fallout. For a moment, I even considered taking a long vacation out of town when the article broke, but Claire talked me out of it. Don't confront her. Stick to the facts, she said wisely. She cheated, you divorced her, and you've moved on. Sadly, my kids would deal with teasing and bullying for the rest of their school years because of Hannah's actions. We'd be addressing the impact of her choices for a long time. I felt sorry for my ex-in-laws, who had become close to me. After the article was published, we invited them to stay at our house to escape the chaos. They mostly kept to themselves, avoiding calls and the public eye. I love my daughter, Hannah's dad admitted, but I'm ashamed she thought it was okay to behave that way. No father wants his daughter to be seen like that. Over time, the scandal faded, and life settled down. The kids spent more time with Claire, our blended family, and me, and our home eventually became the neighborhood hangout spot. At first, Hannah objected, but things smoothed out. I made sure that Sophie and Jack stayed connected with her to prevent any accusations of alienation, and my parents' frequent visits helped maintain peace. When the kids were with me, we didn't talk much about Hannah. Though she was still their mother, she was simply my ex. Out of respect for Claire, the kids eventually began calling her Mom. While Rachel's parents were initially uncomfortable with it, they soon warmed up, as they'd always been close to Claire. Amid all the upheaval, I paid little attention to Hannah's dating life, though the kids occasionally mentioned she was seeing someone. So it surprised me when Sophia told me her mother was engaged. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sadness for what might have been, but then Claire wrapped her arms around me, and that sadness was quickly replaced with joy for everything I had now.